Now, if you're someone who works out from home and not a big fan of going to the gym, then more than likely you are performing body weight home exercises. Now, how many of you guys actually question whether you're doing these exercises correctly or if there is a better way that you can maximize your workouts? In this video, I'm gonna go over 9 of the most common exercises that most people are doing incorrectly. And most importantly, we'll go over how you can correct your technique to get a good workout and prevent any further injury. Let's get started. So the first exercise we're gonna get into is the plank. Many people use this exercise to strengthen the core, but surprisingly, you may be doing this incorrectly. So when we do this, we wanna have a nice straight line and good alignment from our head to our toe. And so when you're setting up, many people will either sag their hips way down too low, or they'll have their hips way up too high. So what you'll wanna do is tuck that tailbone underneath you, keep your feet and knees together, and you'll squeeze that butt to have a nice straight alignment. Another mistake that people do is they'll actually sag their shoulder blades, and so they're passively letting themselves hang in a poor shoulder position. So what you wanna do is, whether you're doing this on your hands or whether you're doing this on your forearms, you wanna push through the ground so you create a nice straight shelf on the top of your upper back. Now, moving on to the glute bridge, a lot of people use this exercise not only to strengthen their glute muscles and their hamstrings, but also their core. One of the common mistakes I see what people make here is they have no awareness of the alignment of their lower back and their pelvis. So simply, they just kind of go up and down and don't really pay attention to what's happening in their midline. So in order to do this correctly, what you want to do is squeeze that bottom. Think about pulling that pelvis underneath you. So instead of arching your lower back and just going straight up and down, you almost want to imagine like you flatten that lower back into the ground, tilt that pelvis backwards, and you squeeze your bottom. And the big key here is not focusing on how high you can go, but focusing on the quality of the movement. Another problem I see with this exercise is people will have their feet too far, so they have no leverage when they're pushing in through the bed or into the ground. So what you want to try to do is stack those feet underneath your knees so you can have good leverage so that you can efficiently push through the ground with your heels, squeezing your bottom and your hamstrings. Next, we're gonna go over the Birddog exercise. This exercise is commonly used for people with back pain, also to strengthen the lower back. So a couple mistakes I see people make is, number one, they actually lift their feet and their arms too high, so they're getting a lot of arching at their lower back. So the second mistake I see people make is, as people are moving their opposite arm and leg, they tend to let their pelvis rotate and their lower back tends to kind of lose that alignment of staying nice and straight. The last mistake I see people make here is they just move too fast, so they find themselves kind of losing control of their midline. So what you want to do is you want to have a good setup with your hands underneath your shoulders and your knees underneath your hips. And what you want to do is contract your abdominals, stay nice and tight. And as you're slowly lifting one arm and the opposite leg, I kind of think about punching that front arm as well as kicking with the heel of that back leg as best as I can. And I'm trying to focus on a nice straight alignment without shifting my weight too far and out of control. The next exercise we're gonna go over is the push-up. So most of the time when people set up, what I commonly see is people will go way too wide with their shoulders, or essentially their hands will be way too far forward when they get started, okay? Another common mistake I see is when people are starting also is when they go down into a push-up, either their pelvis goes down forward first, or either they'll go down with their chest first. The last mistake I'll see people make is what's happening with their hands and their shoulder. A lot of people will set up and their hands will be turned out like this, so as they're going down into a push-up, their elbows flare out to the outside, which can cause some shoulder problems down the long run. So as we're setting up correctly for the push-up, what you want to do is have your hands about shoulder width apart, hands stacked underneath the shoulder with your fingers pointing straight forward or slightly turned out. Now, as you go down into the push-up, like we mentioned, instead of going down with your pelvis or your chest first, we want you to move as a full unit, okay? If that's too difficult, you might find it a little easier going to your knees in order to do this correctly. As far as with the elbows, what I kind of think about is sending my elbows backward instead of allowing them to kind of come forward like this. What I kind of like to do is think about tucking my elbows behind me, so as I go down, I have a nice good vertical position with my forearms there. And then I press up as a unit. So the next exercise we're gonna go over that people do at home is the heel raise or the calf raise. And this exercise is commonly used to strengthen the calf muscles of the lower leg. So what I commonly see from people is two things. Number one is they tend to do a heel raise with their knees slightly bent. Now, although there might be some benefit to strengthening this calf muscle, what we want to do is try to keep those knees straight and then go up on our toes as we raise the heels away from the ground. Another mistake I see people make is as they're going into a calf raise, they tend to roll their weight on the outside of their foot, which doesn't officially contract the entire muscle group. So what you want to do is think about pushing through your big toe, raising those heels straight off the ground, and keeping a nice straight alignment versus allowing your ankles to kind of turn in like this. So the next common exercise we're going to go over is the bodyweight squat. So what most people do when they're squatting is when they first initiate the squat, the first thing they do is actually bring their knees forward, which can cause a lot of pressure on the knees. So what we want to do is actually send those hips backward. Another issue we see people tend to make is actually their feet are too narrow. So when they squat, they're like, oh, I don't have hip range of motion or knee range of motion. So if they have a wider squat stance, then it becomes a little easier to send your hips backward, as well as trying to keep your shins somewhat vertical when you squat versus having your stance too narrow and allowing your knees to come forward. The other mistake I see people make is as they're going down, they're actually allowing their torso to come too far forward. So when they squat, they kind of look like this, okay? What we want to do is try our best to keep a nice upright torso. And as I'm going down, I'm trying to keep a nice tall chest. I'm sending my hips backward and down, trying to stay balanced on my feet as I come up. Now that might require me to use some assistance in a doorway, holding on to a sturdy chair, so you can hold on to something like this. And this will allow you to keep your torso upright as you're working up and down through full range of motion of squats. And then as you get better with the assisted squat, then you can work on some body weight unassisted squats. Also, people will commonly turn their feet too wide like a duck. So when they squat down, it's very easy for their knees to collapse, and then they complain about knee pain. So what you want to do is you want your feet not necessarily straight, but also slightly turned out, not too wide like this. This will allow your knees to easily track over your foot, so you have better alignment as you're squatting down. So the next exercise we use is the burpee. Many people will use this for some cardio to train your aerobic system. So what I commonly see is people do two things. They either go down too slow and they're doing a strict push-up, which is requiring more work, or they tend to just plop down. So the first mistake I see people make is when they go down into a burpee, they actually do like an extra strict push-up, and it makes the burpee just a lot harder. So when they go down, they'll go down into a burpee and then they'll do a strict push-up, and then they'll come back up. Another mistake I see people make is they'll just fall to the ground, which is not gonna make your wrist and your shoulders very happy. So they kind of look like that, throwing their chest on the ground and then pushing themselves back up. So what I kind of think about is as I'm dropping to the ground, instead of just dropping flat or strictly lowering myself, I kind of prepare my upper back and my chest muscles for the drop, and I tighten up my upper back muscles and squeeze my shoulder blades together. So when I'm dropping, I'm controlling my body down as I stand back up. So some people might still find it difficult to go down on the ground. Maybe it's too hard or an impact on their wrists or on their shoulders. You can still do this from an elevated surface where you're still going down and coming up and still perform the burpee just like that, so it's a little easier on the shoulders and on the wrist. So another alternative you can do for the burpee, instead of just dropping down into the ground, maybe that's still too much impact for you, you can actually just think about stepping back. So what that would look like is as you go down into a burpee, you're stepping back, allow your chest to touch the ground, and then you can step up, and you're still gonna get a great stimulus with the burpee. So the next exercise we're gonna get into is the side lunge. So what I commonly see is people, as they go down into a side lunge, their torso kind of leans too far forward, not really using much of their legs to stand back up. Another thing people will do is when they step outward with that leg, they tend to turn that foot outward too far, okay? And that just allows that knee to be vulnerable and be in a bad position as you're standing back up. So what you want to do is actually think about keeping your torso nice and tall. So as you're stepping out, I want my foot just slightly turned out. So now I can allow my knee to track over my foot, trying to keep a nice tall torso Once again, I'll show you from the side. So instead of stepping out with your foot turned way out to the side, think about turning that foot slightly inward so it allows that knee to kind of track over the foot and allows you to kind of keep a nice upright torso, just like this. So the last exercise we're gonna go over is the lunge. Now I commonly see 3 errors with this exercise. Number 1, people are not aware of their stance when they're stepping. So instead of being shoulder width apart, when they step, they're very narrow and they treat this exercise kind of like a balance exercise. Another thing people do also is they actually will lean their torso too far forward, or when they step forward, their torso will be too far up. So they're kind of arching their lower back and they're not really utilizing that front leg as efficiently as it could be. The other thing people tend to do is as they're pushing off that front leg, they tend to allow that knee to collapse and then they push away. So they're using no drive through their hamstrings and their glutes to perform this exercise. Instead, try to keep that knee over the foot and push through the ground just like this. If I were to step forward, I want a nice alignment with the knee straight over the foot, just like that, okay? Guys, thank you for watching today. I hope it was helpful for you. If you would like some more detailed and in-depth instructions on how to do a squat or even a push-up more correctly, you can check out my videos up here that go in-depth on proper technique to maximize your efficiency. Also, as always, please like and subscribe to support my channel. I really appreciate this. See you in the next one.